Well, welcome to another episode of Rimshots with Sean. Brand new logo just introduced yesterday. Thank you for tuning in. I'm here with a brand new friend that you're going to find super interesting, all the way from, I believe, Los Angeles, California, Miss Robyn Flans. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me, Sean.
Well, I appreciate your time. And I bring up your name, and all my drummer friends, why do I know that name? Why? And then I go, she wrote for Modern Drummer for like 30 plus years. Um, How did you start out there? I mean, for a guy like me, I mean, every month that was a big thing for me. I can remember some of my favorite editions, the one where Lars Ulrich was funny in there because I'm a rock guy, right? Um, but I always waited for that. I was like where I grew up in Halifax, Nova Scotia. That was kind of my connection to the world because we were way out in the middle. So I guess your beginnings there, Robyn.
I always gravitated towards drums. I'm not a drummer, disclaimer there. But music was my love, and drums sort of was the focus for me. It was the foundation of the music. And after I decided I wasn't going to be an actress, that was my major in college. I decided that writing was the next best thing and music was the thing. So, modern drummers seemed to be where I sort of gravitated. I started with Billboard magazine, reviewing a little bit, excuse me, and I called Modern Drummer up, and they were very receptive. They were in their infancy, and they didn't have anybody out in Los Angeles interviewing people. And I sort of phonied my way in. And the first interview I did was Danny Serafin of Chicago. It
Ah,
was amazing. Yeah. And we've become long life friends,
it's funny because
lifelong
you're
friends,
out there
long
in the
life.
Mecca.
Long
You're
life.
right, and you're in the Mecca where a lot of those guys and gals were. They were there because if they were session players, that's where everything was. And if they were, trying to make it in the business, there was a Sunset Strip and what have you. So, to be able, you're saying that they didn't have somebody out there. That's kind of one of those, timing and preparedness meeting becomes an opportunity that, I'm not going to say you're lucky. I don't believe in luck. Everything happens for a reason. But what a great opportunity.
Well, they were still actually, what I didn't know was they were still, I think, working out of their garage. And I mean, I'm talking, they were a baby magazine and they were, I think, once every 4 months at the time. I mean, it was like a quarterly. And soon it grew. And Ron, the publisher, was a great man and a great businessman. And soon it was monthly and he owned a building. And I mean, he was off to the races. And he was pretty terrific. And I just began writing for them every month, pretty much. I mean, I was never on staff, but I was like their West Coast. I mean, we joked I was their West Coast staff,
Yep.
but I wasn't.
So did that leave you opportunity to kind of get other things in your repertoire you could write for other people, or did you just say this is going to be my focus? Because I have to imagine, and especially in the days of no internet and everything's done by snail mail or phone calls, just to line those interviews up had to be incredibly time consuming.
They were very time consuming, and you were right. I mean, anytime I wanted to make a revision on an article, I had to retype the whole thing.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it definitely cut down on that creative process. However, yes, you are right. I could not make a living writing for Modern Drummer alone. And although for a while I did, and very meagerly, I might add. But yes, I branched out. I ended up writing for so many different magazines, including People magazine.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, and they were much more generous in their financial um, um, payment and In Touch and people like that. And then I went on staff with Country Weekly for a while and Soap Opera Magazine. And I mean, I did my, I definitely paid dues. But I all along was able to write for Modern Drummer. I mean, none of the gigs kept me from sort of outside contracting, even the staff jobs that I did, because they were all remote. And I was very fortunate.
So
I
that's
worked from
interesting.
home.
Well, and so that's interesting as well because that's a model that today, like in my world where I still play, and if somebody has more than two gigs, you're kind of like you're pimping yourself out, which is ridiculous. But you had a model that you were doing way back then that really people are doing now, to me, correct me if I'm wrong. Is that the way the world worked back then, pretty much?
No,
No.
I think I was uh, a one of a kind, to be honest. Most people, I mean, I was really lucky. And look, I didn't make a lot of money. It was sort of a choice. And it really worked out well when I ended up having children because I was able to be at home. Even though those were my Country Weekly days, and I did end up traveling a bit
Hmm.
for them. Um, but it was still a wonderful opportunity for me to be at home and be able to work in their classrooms and be present in their lives at all times. And like I said, it was, it wasn't great money. I was always struggling, but it was a choice. I could have looked for um, staff writing, and I probably could have gotten it based on my credentials back then. There came a certain time, however, that I crossed the line over into ageism,
Uh,
and then I would never have gotten a staff position. In fact, I'm convinced that I lost my contracting gig at People magazine because they finally set eyes on me
wow.
and no longer called me, even though they used me every single day for several years.
Um, We're going to take a break. I want to pick up on that on because that's a topic that I have been dealing with people that I know quite well, and I like to touch on that a little bit more. We're back after this with Robyn Flans. Well, welcome back to Rimshots with Sean. We're here with Robyn Flans, all the way from Los Angeles. You touched on something just before the break about ageism, and I was sharing with you in the break that it's a real thing. And for you to say that, I guess, and you said they laid eyes on you and you think you lost your gig. So there wasn't a lot of face to face back then, I'm guessing, right? How would you get your material into the magazine when you were writing for them?
Well, they sent me out. Um, they would assign me over the internet. This was People magazine. Um, they assigned me, they sent me out. I would cover, say, some sort of event. I would go out, I would come back. I had to turn it over within hours or by the next morning because they were a daily um, or a weekly. It depended on what they were doing at the time. And then they would pay me. They had never set eyes on me. I'd never gone in for an interview. They just had heard about me and hired me. They loved me until one event. And then they sent out this new young entertainment correspondent. I don't think she had any experience, but I was in my 40s at the time, maybe mid late 40s, I don't know. And I always looked fairly hip. I mean, there was no doubt about it. But after that gig, I was never hired again. And I can only assume this young 20 something went back to the office and said, "Do you know that Robyn Flans is old?"
Yeah.
And that was the end of it.
The hell
I
with
mean, no
those
one had
guys.
ever seen me.
Yeah, because you know what, I'm a firm believer in the world that I'm in podcasting and stuff. And I had an interview with a guy, and he talked about musicians versus digital creators. And you see all these people that they're doing drum stuff and they're doing stick flips and all this stuff, but they're digital creators, and some of them might be able to handle a gig. But in this day and age, there's no, you mentioned paying your dues in the last segment. There's no dues paying. There's no, it's just they think they have to get there and arrive. And there's a whole lot of the business now. To me, there's a lot. Like, it's too easy to get into it now. I don't know if you'd agree with that or not.
Well, yes and no. I agree with that premise, except that there isn't the availability
Mm.
of gigs as there was once before. I mean, there's no record companies, so there are just no opportunities
Right.
for musicians like there were before. So yes, it's too easy because there's digital, you can do it from home. Uh, People can have auto tune.
Yeah.
I mean, there's all sorts of digital masks, but there aren't the opportunities. Um, and it's sad. I mean, I work with a nonprofit organization, and um, and Steve Porcaro, the great session
Hmm.
and Toto person and Porcaro family member, keyboardist and composer, um, was wonderful and generous to play on a track for it's the nonprofit um, produces artists who promote social justice. And he believes in our organization. He came in and played on a track for us. And here he was in the studio. Jim Keltner also contributed to this track. And he said, I don't ever get to do this. We don't have live sessions anymore.
Ah,
This
yeah.
is such a treat. And I thought, he's doing this for free. He's being so generous. And he's telling me that this is a gift to him. Wow.
Amazing. Amazing.
It was such a gift to us.
So, speaking of the Picaro family, and part of the reason why my friend Steve Cody said you got to get Robyn on your podcast, because you wrote a couple of wonderful books about Jeff Picaro, and the man needs no introduction. I mean, one of the greatest, not only session players of all time, but Toto and what have you. So I'm first off, what led you to do that? I mean, obviously, one of the great personalities of that era, but what led you to do that?
Well, Jeff was a good friend of mine. Um, I probably, I mean, I don't know for sure, but I think that I have the most interviews with Jeff on the planet. Um, he was always there for me as far as if I called and wanted him to talk about anything on the record, he was available. If he wasn't home, he called me back. Um, he was just my buddy, and um, it was, I mean, I don't need to tell you what a loss, but it
Hmm.
was personal too. It was very personal, and it still stings, and I think it gets harder as each year or day passes
Hmm.
because they say time heals, but for me, uh, my affliction is that the longer it goes, the harder it is. So, I felt like it, no one's gonna ever forget Jeff, who's was alive during his, shall we say, reign.
Yep.
But my fear is that my son's a drummer. He's 33. Um, and he has friends who, love Jeff. But once that generation is gone, will they know that music? Will they remember? And I don't know. Um, I just don't know. And I want to make sure that they do. And if there are still books, and people are still reading them, I want to make sure that somebody sees that book on a bookshelf somewhere and says, "Oh, who's this? Let me check it out." And goes back over that discography and says, "Whoa, whoa, God, this cat's really great. And I'm going to teach my students about this cat because I don't want him forgotten ever."
Yeah, it's a real thing. We're going to take one more break here, Robin, and we're going to come back and I want to pick up on this because it is a real thing, and I find now so much more things get buried. Like you go on certain sites and it's like people will do well, John Bonham wasn't as good as this guy. It's like, well, John Bonham was doing stuff in the 60s that these guys all learned from, right?
And he was Jeff's idol.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're gonna take a quick break. We will be back after this.
Okay, don't
Welcome
forget.
back to Rimshots with Sean. I'm here with the wonderful Robyn Flans. And the question that I have for you, because I've read a lot of interviews in different magazines, did Jeff really did he know his place in the universe? Because a lot of the interviews that I read with him, he just seemed to be so self-deprecating. Like he would talk about things, and you're going like, does this guy actually get where he sits? Like almost like insulting himself. Was he a humble guy that really was insecure about his playing like that?
He was ridiculous. You know, I, I think a piece of him knew because he knew to stand up for himself. He was a self advocate, okay? When the chips were down, he could say, I'm not taking that shit. I hope I can say that
Ah,
word.
you say what you want. You're royalty around here, my dear.
But he couldn't stand to listen to himself back. He never thought anything he played was good. He thought he sucked at shuffles, the shuffle king, right?
Go on, yes.
He thought his biggest ridiculous quote that's been immortalized that he told me was, "My time sucks." Um, he, yes, he was really humble. And he was the kind of guy that when you stopped him on the NAMM floor, the NAMM show being the music convention in Anaheim or anywhere in the world, but for this sake, like his road guy and dear best friend JMO, Paul Jameson, said in my current book, if you stopped him on the NAMM floor and you ogled him and said, "Oh my God, you're my, favorite, and you're blah 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 blah," Jeff would say, but tell me about yourself."
Hmm.
He always turned it around. He was always interested. He always made you feel like you were the most important person in the room. Um, and that, was due to his upbringing.
Hmm.
You can't talk about Jeff without talking about Joe and Aileen. They were where it all began. His parents were wonderful parents. They encouraged their children to be who they were. They let them fly early on. Um, Both Jeff and Steve left school early to tour. Um, and they instilled in them good manners, good character. and kindness and the right values. I mean, not to say they were perfect people.
Mhm.
Um, I've gotten close to Steve in recent years, um, and he is a giving, generous human being, uh, and kind and honest and valued. And they came from good crop. Let's put it that way.
That's amazing.
And
Um,
yeah, so he was very humble.
so do you think? Because I remember reading a story, and it was an interview with him. Maybe you did it. I don't remember, but he was talking about doing some work with Steely Dan, and he didn't feel maybe good about the session, but they said, "Oh, it's great." And then he came back for another session, and he figured out that they had replaced him with Bernard Purdy. And do, do you think that might have had something? Things like that might have had something to do? Because I mean, I get when you go to the studio and record drums, drums on their own can sound really bad. Even when they're bang on a click track, they can sound really bad until they're kind of sparkled up and whatnot. But do you think things like that might have led him to kind of believe that he wasn't worthy?
I just think he was a perfectionist. And you know what? He was a kind of guy, and it's in both my books. He actually, I don't think that bothered him. Because he was the kind of guy who would go on a session and actually look at the artist, like Warren Zevon or um, uh, uh, I can't think of them, but there were many artists. He would look at them and he would say, "I'm not the right guy for this session.
Haha.
Call so and so. Call Jim Keltner. Get him down here right now." He'd get on the phone and call Jim. Hey, or Greg Bissonette, or um, any number of people. I mean, a lot of drummers have stories of Jeff calling them up and saying, I'm not the right guy for this track. You got to come down here." I mean, who does that?
Very few
Rick
people.
Murata. I mean, nobody I know except for Jeff.
Yep.
Honestly, because nobody gives work away. And then he would stay. It wasn't like he was trying to go home. He'd stay at the session and watch it.
We up here in Canada, when we identify people that are, next level, we call them beauties, right? I think he'd be an absolute beauty in this age of social media because I had a post today where on my own socials where somebody had posted a show they were doing, and somebody went in the comments and said, "Oh, I'm sorry I can't make it because I'm playing here at this time," and basically pumped their own show on somebody else's post. And I think what you're saying there would be amazing. That you're right. Nobody says call blah 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 or call it. They want to try to keep the gig for themselves. That to me just speaks volumes of the character of that guy.
He gave so many gigs to so many people. I mean, just gave them to people and started people's careers and recommended people. I mean, the thing about my books is the amount of people's lives he touched. It is mind-boggling. I mean, I tear up when I think about the lives he touched. And the crazy thing is, I never thought about doing a second book. Not in a trillion years. I barely got through the first one. It took me 8 years to write.
Well, I was going to ask you, was it difficult to do that? Because you're obviously there's stories you probably know, but then there's stories you probably heard that you didn't know about, and they probably touch you in a certain way.
I cried through a lot of the interviews, or at least toward the end of every interview. I mean, and it was, I think, cathartic for a lot of the people I spoke with. I mean, I think that they wanted well, everyone wanted to talk about Jeffrey, but they needed to get stuff out, and nobody had ever asked them about it. And it was, I mean, all the interviews were hard, but the 8 years took me a lot of time because it was, I had a lot of stops and starts. I had a lot of insecurity. I had a lot of thoughts, gee, I can't get to share, and she's such a big part of the story. And, can I really write this book without her? And Mike Picaro was so sick, and can I
Mm.
write this story without him? And I mean, I had a lot of doubt. And, I would pick it up, I'd put it down, I'd pick it anyway. But the second book came about because I kept the first book under wraps up until it was almost released because I wasn't sure I was going to release it. And after it was released, so many people came out of the woodwork and said, "Oh my God, I wish I had known because I have a story." And I thought, how can I not have their stories? How can I not document all of this? And the crazy thing, Sean, is that the same thing is happening again.
Huh.
People are coming out and saying, I drove their trucks and I was around him all the time and this happened and that happened. And I mean, personal things that they're telling me over instant message and things. And they're still bringing me to tears because of the lives he's touched everywhere. It's crazy.
There's a Facebook page that I follow, and it's about the late great Hal Blaine.
Oh, I do too.
Yeah, Ingrid, and I've had Ingrid on the show. She was wonderful, and some of the stories she tells are so funny because like you just get the feeling like Hal, and he just
Al was a friend of mine.
well, and one of the characters are rock and roll and playing, right? The one thing Ingrid always talks about is how when he went and he did his job, but he wasn't about drums and he wanted to live life. And did Jeff have a tinge of that? Because I mean, I think Jeff Beccaro and the way he played, in my mind, I see him driving to the studio and doing the work and then going home and practicing his ass off for three or
Oh
four
no, he
hours.
never practiced.
See, I
No.
love that. I love that.
I mean, I shouldn't say never because I wasn't with him all the time, but um I never saw a drum set in his house.
Huh.
Um and he no, he when he went home, I mean, it's no secret he smoked a lot of pot. Um he and he had a lot of pain in his arms and his hands, and he struggled with that, which is why he didn't like doing a lot of takes in the studio, and the only ones that he would suffer that with was Steely Dan. um
He had carpal
Other
tunnel, right?
people, yeah, but
Yeah.
he also, we're not sure. He may have had some, vascular something going on, um, because there's a lot of stories from his young life, even when he was young, that some of his bandmates would have to actually uncurl his fingers around
Oh
his
wow.
sticks. So he had a lot of pain, and even his father said he thinks that's why he smoked a lot of pot,
Hmm.
that he was dealing with a lot of pain issues. Because he didn't get high. I mean, he could smoke on a session, and I think it was pain related.
Yep.
Um, but that aside, when he went home, he was relaxing. He listened to music. He did whatever. And then when he had children, he was all about his kids. Um, but no, he didn't. He was not a practicer.
It's
I
it,
mean, I
it,
think he thought he did a lot of back-to-back sessions. That was his practice.
Sure, for sure. And I mean, the thing for me, I remember before I actually heard Jeff's speaking voice, like back in the 80s when he released that home video, I remember seeing a picture of him and going like, then you hear the voice, and he's got this deep, almost baritone. Like I got the feeling like initially he was like, I'd be the guy that would kick Jeff Picaro's ass. Then I heard him, no, Jeff Picaro would kick my ass. Right? He just had this presence about him.
Yeah. Have you ever heard him laugh?
I I just saw a video once or twice. It was a yeah, it was pretty burrowing, no question, no question. Um,
He's got the best laugh in the world. If I mean, I said in my forward thing in the first book, if I could have bottled that laugh, I'd be a millionaire.
yeah, for sure, and that sense of humor too. And you know what? I happen to think that with people like you, people like myself, and a lot of people that I know, I think it's going to be a long time, if ever, that people forget Jeff Beccaro because I mean he's like one of those Easter eggs that they talk about now. Like you hear something and then you go hear a deep cut that you might not have heard before, and you go like, "Wow, that's Jeff Beccaro." And I had no idea the amount of what he contributed to the Thriller album. And I'm was like, "Where have I
Oh
been my
yeah.
whole life?" I mean, and him and Lukather and all those folks. I mean, they just did so much. I think their legacy is going to be pretty far reaching.
I hope you're right, Sean, but I don't want to take any chances.
No, and you know what? If you got a new book coming out, please let me know when if that happens because I would love to spread the word on that. And I'll note you wrote a book about the absolute legend Ed Shaughnessy as well, who he's the guy. One of my favorite Ed Shaughnessy moments is when he had the battle with Buddy Rich on the Tonight Show, and I remember everybody going, "This friggin' guy's amazing," right? With the pork chop sideburns and the glasses and just the curly hair, just a beast.
Eddie was one of my very best friends in the whole universe. Um, and at the end, when things got rough for him, I was very thankful that I moved very close by. I actually took him to all his doctor's appointments, and um, we became extremely close. I I'm still pretty angry at him for leaving this planet.
Mm.
Um, because he didn't have to leave. He was a stubborn man, and I feel like he could have hung on longer. Um, he was um, he was pretty wonderful. He and I worked on that book together for a long time, and it was some of the best friendship times of my life. And it's real different working with someone on a book than writing it after they're gone, of course.
Absolutely.
Um, and he was we were really good friends. I pass his street every day when I go out to drive, and I miss him very much. I think of him every awards show because he used to love to watch the awards. We talk about them all the time. And yeah, he was somebody really special. I mean, one of the luckiest people in the world to have had these friendships. I can't even tell you, Sean. I'm really blessed.
Well, and I mean, you and I, we've been talking on text, and I've just met you here for the first time face to face. But I'm no empath or anything like that. But I do get the level of sincerity that you're throwing about wanting to protect and promote and keep these people's legacies. And you got to see them in some of their bad times, but I mean, you're doing a job to make sure that people remember them in the best of times, and that's something else that I think people should very, very, very be quite appreciative of.
Well, it's interesting because, the Amazon reviews for my first Jeff book, it's interesting where the people's hearts lay, because most of them are really good, and then there was one that really was interesting that said, "Boy, these reviews must be from friends of hers because." Yeah, and I'm thinking that tells me exactly where how dark your heart is,
Yeah.
because there are people who wanted the salacious stuff. They wanted the dark stuff. I vowed I was not going to talk about his passing. or any of the controversy or any of that. Why? Why would I? Why? That's not who I am, and that's not who the people who love him are. It's
Well,
not.
and to your point, I mean, it you can get 1,000 good responses, and the bad one is the one you focus on. And it's taken me a long time to realize that the people that do that really don't have a lot going on. As cheesy as it sounds, if you sat across the table from them, they'd be a totally different person. They wouldn't be laying that smack down. They wouldn't be talking like that. But they have this security of this internet bubble where they feel they can do some stuff, and
Oh yeah.
it's it's people that
No,
don't
it
have a
it
lot going
doesn't
on.
bother me.
Good
It
for you.
doesn't bother me.
Good for you.
It just tells me that they have darkness, and it makes me sad that they can't see how beautiful he was and all of the good. I'm not
Well,
here to be negative.
the thing about Mr. Picaro that I've said this 1,000 times, his drumming just sounded so happy. I mean, you mentioned his hero was John Bonham, who was a behind the beat drummer who, power and whatever. But Jeff's drumming just sounded so happy and peppy, and it's very few people can play like that. It's just a really somebody had mentioned it to me. It's like people that grew up kind of in the vaudeville sort of influence where it's all about singers and drums interacting can do that, but for the most part, you don't get a lot of that. So his drumming just sounded so happy and peppy all the time to me.
Well, he played from his heart.
Mm.
And for me, I admire a lot of drummers. I mean, I'm a feel kind of gal. It's not about chops for me. I mean, there are a lot of drummers whose playing you can take all and throw it in the garbage. People that are idols of other drummers, and they would cut my head off if I said I didn't like their playing. Um, but that's not the kind of music I'm into.
Hmm.
I'm into just feel. I mean, if you give me Jeff on Michael McDonald or, Boz Scaggs, I mean, it's all about his groove and where he lays his time feel, and it's that's all. It doesn't have to be a lot of notes. There doesn't have to be a lot of beats. It doesn't have to be a lot of crap.
Yeah,
It's just
absolutely.
about
Well, and
and yeah.
people talk about Rosanna, my all time favorite Jeff Porcaro piece. No friggin' apologies whatsoever is Lido Shuffle. 100%. That song to me every time I hear it. I kind of get going like this, but it's just a perfect piece of drumming music.
No, there's a lot of Jeff perfect pieces. I mean, that's why from Michael McDonald, I keep forgetting. I mean, there's so much perfection that my dog's name is Rosanna, by the way.
Nice.
Um, my last dog's name was Procaro. Um, I one track mind.
Absolutely. You like what you like, and I
But
like it too. So
it's just he's I mean, there are other I love the feel guys. I mean, Levon Helm,
mm.
Roger Hawkins, Earl Palmer. I mean, there's just no getting around those people who just feel it from their soul, and oh shoot, I meant to unplug that.
It's
I'm
all good.
sorry. Um,
Well, I'll tell you a funny story. I
it's
interviewed Leland Sklar, and 10 minutes into the
uh
interview with Leland, his phone rang. He goes, "I got to take this." It was his plumber. And he had been trying to get hold.
oh my God.
So he left it running. It was just such a classic sort of thing where you got to get over here because his wife wanted the sink fixed. And anyway, it was hilarious. So that stuff is it's perfect, almost live TV. I want to end on a little bit of fun, if you don't mind. And like I said, I promise you,
Sure.
we keep it positive. So, of all the interviews you've done, could you maybe give me a couple outside of Jeff? outside of Eddie. But a couple that you just went, wow, I just really absolutely love this person as a human being.
Oh gosh. Do you want just drummers or
Whoever you
anybody?
like, anybody.
Uh, First one comes to mind. I don't know if you know who she is, Rachel Platten.
I've heard the name, yes.
The fight song. She's the most authentic person I ever interviewed. We bonded. She's amazing. Um, who else? Oh my God. I mean, um, Joe Montana from Criminal Minds.
Ah, yes.
Um, we cried together. It was, I mean, it was, gosh, it was really a heavy interview. Um, there are just people that you connect with in major ways. For my book, Abraham Laboriel Sr., um, we cried. I cried with a lot of people that I interviewed for the books, but Abraham was, it was, it really was so intense. And Stan Lynch, also for the
Oh, yeah.
second book, it was really heavy. He's a very uh, visual speaker. Um, he was, for those who don't remember, he was Tom Petty's
Mhm.
original drummer. Um, um, gosh, I mean, just personal rushes. I loved meeting and interviewing Tom Hanks. Um, big thrill. You can see behind me, Linda Ronstadt.
Yes.
Interviewing her was a dream come true. She's was my idol growing up. I still is, but she was a personal idol. Um, Ringo Starr. I've interviewed him many times, and he was just the best. Um, yeah, I mean, those are, but the connections, the big connections, God, I really, recently, I guess I'm thinking about Rachel. She was a real heavy connection. And I'm thinking about Joe Montana was just really heavy.
Um,
The people that you cry with are just woof.
I'd like to ask you this. It's only happened to me once. I've got over 500 interviews now on my podcast. It's happened once, so it's got to be coming down the pike again. But you line somebody up for an interview that you're very much looking forward to, and then they just turn out to be a complete a-hole, but you still have to get your way through it. I'm not asking you to name names. I would never do that. But how would you get yourself through that if it happened?
Uh, well, I don't mind naming a name.
Okay.
I think he might have changed. It may have been drugs. I'm going to give it a shot here and hope that it was. I had a real rough time with Don Henley back in the
Hmm.
day.
Yeah.
A very, very, very bad time. And he was very abusive. And I was really looking forward to it because I was a big fan. And it was very painful.
Yeah.
And I thought I would get through it. And I did get through it. Took it like a champ until I couldn't anymore. And I went through the interview. I went through with it. And then it was still abusive
Yeah.
after the interview.
I've heard
And
that
then I
about him.
and then I stood up to him.
Good for
And then
you.
it was still abusive.
But you did it. You did it.
And the interview never printed. The record label paid me off.
Well, there you go. So you won in the end, my friend. You won in the end, right?
I mean, I never felt like I won.
Yeah.
I felt like, I had to say something, but it didn't matter because it fell on deaf ears. At that point, he just said, "I can't work with you." I mean, it was horrible.
Yeah.
But he forgot, apparently, because he contributed to my second book via email. This was decades ago. I think there were drugs, just like the Ricky Lee Jones story with Jeff Porcaro.
Hmm.
There were drugs. I don't think she remember. I know she didn't remember because she hired Jeff again after he walked out on her session. And I think, it's unfortunate when people are fu- effed up.
Um, I've got a Don Henley story. Can I tell it to you quickly?
Oh, please.
So I interviewed a gentleman by the name of Alan Niven. So Alan Niven used to manage Guns N' Roses back when, they were in their heyday. And they were playing, I think it was on the American Music Awards, and their drummer had broke his hand. So Axl Rose was doing um, some vocals on Don Henley's solo album. So they asked Don Henley to do the show. So I asked Alan about that,
Wait.
and he said that they're in rehearsal, and Slash comes up and says, "What's going on with the feather drummer?" And Alan's this old English guy. "Oh, what are you talking about? The feather, they couldn't hear him. He didn't hit hard at all. And they were used to their drummer just pounding it. So they almost had to fire him because he wasn't hitting the drums hard enough. And then finally, Alan went and talked to him. And I guess for the show, he sort of come onto them a little bit. But he was forever known in the Guns N' Roses campus, the feather drummer.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah, there you
That's
go.
really funny.
There you go. So take that, Don Henley. Look, I want to thank you so much for doing this. This has been you've been a treat to deal with straight from when we first connected to now. I love to stay in touch with you because I feel like you have more stuff coming out.
Oh,
Um, you know,
please
and
do, Sean. This has been a total joy.
well, and
You
one
are
last.
great.
Well, thank you. You know what? And I'm not even a trained journalist, if you can believe that.
Because the great thing is you know how to have a conversation. And to me, that's the way to have an interview.
Yeah, and I really try to. I studied your story before I did this, and I try to pride myself on not asking the same old cheesy questions you've been maybe asked 1,000 times, and hopefully I didn't do that. The stories are great. I feel like I could sit here all afternoon talking to you about it. But where can my viewers find out how to get your books and find out more about you and what you have on the go?
Well, either at hudsonmusic.com, which is the publisher, or if you live in the States, you can go to my website, info at robynflansdrummerinterviews.com, and get an autographed copy.
And she will get back to you, my friends. Trust me. She is one of the most accountable people I've dealt with in the last while. So, Robyn Flans, thank you so much.
It was my total pleasure, Sean.
Right back at you, my friend. We will, for sure. Thank you.